Welcome back, warriors. Kwe Tanse Sego Anibuju. Kwe Nindaluizi Pam Palmater, and I am the host of this show, The Warrior Life. This podcast is a show about living the warrior life, a lifestyle that focuses on decolonizing our minds, bodies, and spirits, while at the same time revitalizing our cultures, traditions, laws, and governing practices. And it's also about asserting, living, and defending our sovereignty all over Turtle Island. But before we jump right into things, don't forget to support this podcast by becoming a monthly donor on Patreon or making a one-time support donation on the Buy Me a Coffee app. We also have a selection of great t-shirts and hoodies, the proceeds of which help support this podcast and the Warrior Kids podcast, so we can make sure kids are included too. Your support helps keep my content entirely independent and ad-free. There's also non-monetary ways that you can support this podcast by liking each episode, leaving comments, leaving positive reviews, sharing episodes on social media, or using it in your classrooms. Now, back to the podcast. Last week, Warrior Life Podcast was a conversation with three Mohawk land defenders, Skylar Williams, Layla Stotts, also known as Layla Black, and Logan Stotts, all from Six Nations, which is part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. They traveled to Wetsuweten territory to support Wetsuweten hereditary chiefs, clan members, and other land defenders and relations who were there when the RCMP invaded Wet'suweten Yinta and forcibly removed Indigenous peoples from their lands. After seeing and hearing about the RCMP violence committed against Indigenous land defenders who were peaceful and unarmed, we wanted to check in with Sleydo. Many of you know her as Molly Wickham. Sleydo is the spokesperson for the Gidimt'en clan, one of the clans of the Wet'suweten Nation. She was just on our podcast this past October, making a call out for solidarity actions because she felt that an RCMP invasion was imminent. And she was right. The RCMP forcibly removed Wet'suweten and their relations from their lands, arrested and detained them. While the photos and videos we saw of the RCMP using an axe and a chainsaw to get at these peaceful land defenders was horrifying, the media didn't show everything that happens, including what happens afterwards, where there aren't any cameras. The RCMP violence and degradation and racism that is brought to Indigenous peoples after the arrests. Skylar, Layla, and Logan spoke about some of that in our last podcast episode, and Sleydo Molly Wickham joined me to share her specific experiences. But before we roll the clip of my convo with Sleydo, I think it's important to set the context for those who might only be joining us for the first time today or who haven't been keeping track about what the issues are out there. Keeping in mind, I am not a spokesperson for the Wet'suweten Nation. All of my information comes from Wet'suweten hereditary leaders, land defenders, and publications that they make. First of all, Wet'suweten Nation has Aboriginal title over all of their traditional territory. It's never been ceded, surrendered, or extinguished. And when questions about their title were litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada in the Delgamuukw case, it was the traditional hereditary leaders that represented the Wet'suweten Nations, not the individual First Nation chief and councillors. The Wet'suweten Nation tried years ago to have Coastal GasLink pipeline build their pipeline on an alternative route. Coastal GasLink refused, claiming it would cost too much. According to the Wet'suweten hereditary leaders and clan members, Coastal GasLink pipeline does not have their free, prior, and informed consent of all members of the Wet'suweten Nation. They don't have permission from the hereditary leaders or through any of their traditional decision-making processes. This is important because the Wet'suweten are still governed by their traditional laws and governing systems. It's also important to note that it is against Indigenous laws, BC and Canadian laws, and international laws to forcibly remove Indigenous peoples from their own territories. Both the province of British Columbia and the federal government have passed legislation to recognize UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as applicable in BC law and Canadian law. And we all know that UNDRIP recognizes the rights of the Wet'suweten to govern their own lands according to their own laws, and they have a right to say yes or no to activity that happens on their lands. It's also really important to note that although we're talking about a very specific RCMP invasion of Wet'suweten territory, this isn't the first time it's happened. This is the third major invasion by the RCMP. And we all know that the RCMP is a male-dominated paramilitary organization that, according to many reports, including the most recent written by a former Supreme Court of Canada justice, is infected with a toxic culture of racism, misogyny, homophobia, and violence at all ranks and in all provinces. They are a lawless, violent organization, especially those in CERG, which act like private security for the extractive industry. And I think it's also important to note all of the reports that have confirmed that the RCMP's pension have a vested interest in the CGL pipeline going through Wet'suweten territory. It is reported that well over $100 million of the RCMP pension is invested in TC Energy, which is the parent company of Coastal GasLink pipeline. And further, that the Public Sector Pension Investment Board invests in many extractive industry companies, especially in oil and gas. The United Nations Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination called on Canada to stop the Coastal GasLink pipeline, to remove the RCMP and all of their weapons away from Wet'suweten territory, and to protect Indigenous peoples and respect their human rights. They also called on Canada to respect the free, prior, and informed consent of the Wet'suweten, and that none of these projects should go forward unless and until they have that. Canada's failed to comply. This means that Canada and the RCMP are literally outlaws. They are acting outside of their own rule of law and the international rule of law to which it has agreed to be bound. Hopefully, that provides new listeners with the relevant background context to better understand the core issues that are at stake here. This is about lawlessness by the RCMP, the province of BC, the federal government, and Coastal GasLink pipeline, not lawlessness by the Wet'suweten people. So now let's listen into the conversation that I had with Sleydo, who was back in her home territory after she was released from RCMP detention and the court process, and find out what happened and what's happening next. Welcome back to the show, Sleydo. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances.
Thank you for having me. And yes, it seems like we are continually dealing with these issues on Indigenous territories year after year. And hopefully one day we will see an end to that.
Yeah, it's got to be the future podcast. That has to be our goals. Well, for anyone who's just joining us now, maybe you could introduce yourself according to your own protocols.
Sure. Hari sai Sleydo Sydney, Gidimt'en Hesley, Cassia Dista, Wetsuweten is den, Clodespin Wistai. I'm Sleydo. My English name is Molly Wickham. I hold the name in Cassia House, which is the grizzly bear house of the Gidimt'en clan of the Wet'suweten Nation. And I live at Clodespin, which is the name of our Cassia territory that we have been defending against the Coastal GasLink pipeline.
Well, thank you for making the time. I can't imagine what a zoo it must be with everything that's happened in terms of the RCMP and the court process. Molly, the last time we talked, you had made a call out for a National Week of Solidarity, and you said at the time that you've kind of felt like an RCMP raid was imminent again. What made you think that?
I guess it's, we live in small communities, and we are really, it's really obvious when there's new people in the community, when there's something going on. And, we really feel like we have good support in the community that tell us when there's people that are, when there's RCMP that are amassing in the communities. And also there's just really a lot of, a lot that's been going on the territory that we have been keeping an eye on. So we need to always be vigilant and prepare for what's coming. And we usually have some pretty good signs that that's going to happen.
Well, I mean, you seem to have called it every single time. You knew when the movement was happening. Now, um, literally, when I saw the video that was released after the arrest, what it looked like to me was literally a horror movie. And I've been saying that on every platform, that it looked like something out of The Shining. Literally, the RCMP hacking into the house with an axe and then a chainsaw. Meanwhile, with high powered guns directed right at you. I mean, you must have been worried that this time they were really escalating the violence.
Yeah, and in fact, they actually, all of their tactics so far have demonstrated that they have been escalating their violence, and so it was a very real, day and hours and moments when the guns were trained on us and the dogs were there, and you just, any wrong move or any movement at all felt like that could have been it.
Well, for us, it's, watching it, and anyone who isn't in the territory, knowing that there wasn't anything right in the moment we could do, it made us pretty thankful that there were some of, allied nations out there. On the podcast this week, I was talking to Skylar Williams and Layla Stotts and Logan Stotts, and how they were trying to kind of be like a front line before the RCMP got to you. I mean, how important is it for all of us as First Nations all across the country to be allies with Wetsuweten land defenders?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and we're so grateful for all of the allies that come and stood with us during those days of the raids, but also that have been here over the years, building those relationships, and people that have, done actions where in their territories and have started those political alliances as well, because we're all in this together. We started a campaign last year that we are one from coast to coast, and that we're all dealing with the same types of genocide and the same types of colonial tactics and violence from the police and industry on our territories. And so a lot of people really see those struggles, and it helps us to stand strong when we know that we're not alone. We are a small nation compared to a lot of other nations, especially compared to the Haudenosaunee and some of the other nations out east. Our numbers are quite small, but our territory is very large, and so it's challenging for us to be able to protect our territory in the way that we need to by ourselves. And so we are so grateful and appreciative of all of the sacrifice that the other warriors and other nations have brought, and that stand with us. And also our Gidimt'en neighbors, they have been very solid throughout this whole struggle, standing with us on the Yinta, and also, creating their own actions on their territories that have been critical, and especially in this occupation of Coyote camp.
Well, and one of the things I've noticed that there's a trend with all of the different allied nations or individuals that have spoken about this is that they're doing all of this out of love and support and a sense of solidarity. None of them have violent intentions. None of them come there armed with weapons. There's nothing dangerous about the situation, no matter what the RCMP says, that literally this is like the biggest show of love that they could give.
Yeah, when on the day of the raid at Gidimt'en checkpoint, they're all standing across the bridge from all of these armed militarized police and attack dogs and snipers trained on them. And everybody gathered around our elder that was there, who was trying to talk to the police. And they gathered around her, and they all linked arms, and they were just protecting her. And they were singing, and talking, trying to de-escalate the situation. And that's, what they were there for, was to protect our sacred water, our elders, the love that they have. And, we all feel like family now because we all drink out of the same river. We've all sat around the fire and shared stories and shared songs and shared really important, our governance systems, and talked about those things. And so we really feel connected to those people, and they feel connected to our territory, and our territory, holds them in a really special way as well.
Well, and you can hear it in their voices too. I mean, when I was hearing Logan talk about saying, when you're facing essentially an army who are trying to attack you. He's like, what do I do? Am I supposed to fight them? And they all said, no, it's just about holding on tightly to one another and holding on to each other when it happens. Whatever happens goes down. And that it just makes the rest of us so upset that the state would literally pull out an army like that for peaceful, unarmed land defenders who are just trying to protect the water for everybody. It literally makes no sense. And one of the things I heard in the media, you were being interviewed, I think it was by Brandy Morin, about what happened after they pulled you out of the cabin and they stuck you in a police vehicle with all of your winter gear on, with the heat on max, and just left you there to swelter in the vehicle.
Yeah, the treatment that we received once we were arrested was severely punitive, violated our Indigenous rights and our human rights. There were hours and hours, sometimes 12 hours, where we were left without food or water, especially the day of the arrest. We were in the back of a vehicle for 2 hours with the heat full blast, just sweating and nearly passed out, and then weren't provided water or food, for another 10 hours after that. And so the conditions were actually really severe, and just really, really made the fact that we were guilty. It's not, people say, you're innocent until proven guilty, but no, absolutely not. Especially with this group of RCMP, this group of police. This is the CIRG, the Community Industry Response Group, and they are absolutely out of control. They're the ones that are increasing this and escalating the violence. They have no accountability whatsoever. Even many of them are reservist cops. They pull them out of the reserves of RCMP in the province, and they're not accountable underneath the regular provincial RCMP Act. And so they know that, and they act accordingly, with impunity. And they can treat us however they want. They refused to give us COVID masks when we asked for COVID masks, even though they weren't using COVID masks inside the vehicle. They said we weren't being polite enough when they just had semi-automatic weapons pointed in our faces and violently arrested us out of our own home. But we weren't being polite enough, so we didn't deserve to be protected from the global pandemic that was happening.
I can't help but think that this is very personal. I mean, the RCMP in general has a problem, but there's a real problem with the BC RCMP. I mean, I saw a video of one of the RCMP officers like, I want Molly. Like it was going to be his big hunting prize to be the one to arrest you or process you. I mean, how ridiculous is that? Or when they went to arrest your husband and called him Cody Wickham instead, it's like, I'm going to go get him. What is it? What's in it for them aside from very nice pensions from TC Energy in which they have stocks? But why are they making this so personal?
Yeah, I think that this is very representative of the CIRG unit themselves. Like they are specifically hired to protect industry. And so when somebody is doing something or they perceive somebody to do something that threatens the industry that they're being paid to protect, then they take it personally. It's their job personally to protect CGL on the territory. And they absolutely have made reference to, being targeting myself and targeting certain individuals. There were some officers, as I was being driven by, paraded in the back of the cop truck through a whole line of CGL workers. And some of the RCMP were just smiling at me. They're like, hey, Molly, how you doing? Like it was very targeted. They announced it over the radio as soon as I was arrested, several times that they had arrested me. And then they went and arrested my husband, who was standing around a campfire to support me on the, near the road to our home, not anywhere near a work site. Not blocking anything or doing anything that could even be perceived as breaking the injunction or violating the injunction. So this is getting very personal and very targeted and escalating in violence.
It's not even something that we could make up. It's literally there. It's them on video just being so excited. And it made me think when I heard, you were arrested, then your husband's arrested. And I was like, oh my goodness, please don't touch those kids or the rest of her family, because I wouldn't put it past them.
Oh, absolutely. And that was a huge concern of ours. They went and arrested Cody, and he was, caretaking for our children this whole time that I was at Coyote camp. And so it was very concerning for me. And I actually, I was very calm for the most part during the arrest. And at that point, I just, my emotions got the best of me, and I was yelling and I was swearing and I was so mad, and not at Cody, but at the RCMP for going and arresting him. And we had to make a decision about, who's going to go in there. There was an exclusion zone. Obviously, the kids were cared for, that they were safe and somebody was there taking care of them. But I absolutely wouldn't put it past them to come and try to do something like that. And there was, the chief's daughter was there and was just as violently arrested as myself. And, she was saying, I'm Wass's daughter. I'm the chief's daughter. You're not allowed in. This is a Wass's cabin, with her partner, her Haudenosaunee partner, Jay. And, it was, the video actually for that is going to be out soon, but people haven't seen that yet. And that's a huge other part of this story, is that, all of these attack dogs, and at Coyote camp, the attack dogs and the sniper rifles, they're all aimed at Indigenous women.
Yeah. I mean, talk about violence against Indigenous women and girls in this country. And we've been saying all of the danger that's associated with man camps and construction, including police officers. And here they have no problems doing this all on video. Like all of it smashing into the cabin, guns pointed at women who are unarmed and who have always been unarmed. I mean, all of that just, it seemed unreal. And what concerned me was really looking from the outside, the escalation of it, the escalation of the numbers, the escalation of the violence, and that you were kept in detention for longer than even the Haudenosaunee land defenders. Like, I think they were out after 28 grueling hours, but they kept you much longer, didn't they?
Yeah, I was in jail for 5 days, for 4 nights and 5 days, which is really unprecedented for a civil charge, for a breach of injunction for a civil charge. And I think we counted that I was in 8 different cells, that we all were in 8 different cells. We were in 4 different jails, and eventually ended up in the correctional center on the last night and the last day. So the last, spent 1 night at the correctional center and 1 full day there, just in holding cells, waiting to be, before I even saw a judge. It was 5 days before I was even before a judge, to argue my conditions for release, which the conditions were actually horrendous and absolutely in violation of our Section 35 rights under the Constitution, and in violation of all our Wetsuweten rights and our access to the land, and the court, CGL, put forward all of those conditions, and the court accepted them. So there's this private industry and the Canadian court who are acting as Indian agents, determining who is and who isn't Wet'suwet'en, who is and who isn't allowed to be on the territory, and when and how. And they are making those decisions in 2021. That is still happening, and it's setting a really dangerous precedent for the violation of Indigenous rights.
Well, and I even heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they were questioning your identity, trying to make shift the burden onto you to prove that you're even part of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. I mean, I don't know what kind of card you need for that, but kind of living on the territory, being part of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, is that not identity enough for them?
Yeah, and it was actually really interesting because they wanted to argue that I wasn't Wet'suwet'en and that I didn't have a right to be on the territory and that I shouldn't be allowed to go back on the territory. And so, and our chiefs, our house chiefs of our clan are sitting there in the courtroom. when they're trying to, make these arguments, and then they decided against it because, we were gonna, the chiefs were sitting right there. It'd be so easy to get an affidavit that I hold a name in our clan, which is a certain, comes with specific responsibilities and also specific position within our system. And it was absolutely absurd to me that they would do that, but they also did that to other people. They challenged Wass's daughter's identity. They challenged Shay's, one of the other Indigenous women that was with us. They had challenged her identity. They challenged Jossie's partner's identity, and not his identity, but his reasoning for being on the territory, saying that he had no rights. But under our system, our partners and our husbands and our wives, like, they have specific rights under our system. They have specific rights to access our territory and specific responsibilities to our territory as well.
Well, and I guess the gross thing about all of this is that this is the Coastal GasLink. This is all under civil procedures. It's Coastal GasLink. It's not the federal government. It's not the provincial government. There's no Wetsuweten rights even involved here. It's just corporate rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And this whole injunction, it's absolutely disgusting how they're using that just to criminalize Indigenous people on our own territories. And that they are being given so much leverage and leeway within the court system as a private corporation, where they have no right to be saying any of these things. They have it's laughable that they would even think that they could determine somebody's lineage and somebody's identity in a colonial court, given evidence by a private industry like Coastal GasLink.
It is repugnant. Before you go, can you give us a sense of what's next? Obviously, you've been arrested. You've been charged with one or more civil offenses, I guess. And there's probably going to be more court proceedings. But what's next for Gidimt'en clan? I mean, we all tried to put together a submission really quickly to the UN CERD, the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, their early warning and urgent action process, and say, look what's happening over here. They're not only not listening to your first directive to stop the pipeline and get the RCMP out of there, but they're in literally potentially physical danger here with the RCMP, and hope that CERD will take some action. But is there anything that's next for you? Are you back home on your territory now?
Yeah, so I'm back home on my territory in a limited capacity. I can't go and access the territory in the way that I normally should or would be able to. So I have conditions that say I'm only allowed to use the territory for cultural purposes, hunting or fishing, but I'm not allowed to go within 75 meters of the pipeline right-of-way. And the right-of-way cuts right through the heart of our territory, which limits my access. So I can't go and set traps. I can't go and hunt up certain roads because I can only go so far, and then I have to turn around and go back, which really restricts me. But we are still at, our home on the territory. We still have the Gidimt'en checkpoint that we need to be occupying, that people need to be at. Everything kind of falls apart after a raid, and we really need support on the ground to be rebuilding everything that we need to protect the territory. And this fight is not over for us. We're having meetings with our chiefs and our nation and our Takaise about what are the next steps. We're continuing to build those relationships with our Haudenosaunee allies. We're continuing to invite people to the territory. This is far from over, and we have to do everything that we can to protect Wet'suweten.
Okay, so ways that people can help are to go to your website, untoaccess.com. It's got all the different ways in which supporters can help by doing call outs and letters and organizational support. And then you have protocols around people coming to camp who can come and support on the ground. And there's also donations. Are we still able to give donations for legal fees and camp supplies and things like that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of legal things that are happening right now. And also Coastal GasLink destroyed our camp. They destroyed Coyote camp and came in and bulldozed everything and took it in dump trucks again away. So a lot of the supplies that people had donated have been destroyed. So there is a link for fundraising that's on our website at yintaaccess.com. And we want to encourage people to follow along, and please, come to the INTA if you can, check in about that. And we're really trying to target the investors because they, they're on really shaky ground right now. And I think that we can put a lot of pressure on them in a lot of ways.
Well, thank you so much, Molly. I know you're enjoying precious time with your babies and you're doing so much media and education and outreach and trying to organize with everyone. So I just want to say thank you for all you do. You literally are an inspiration for everyone else, because we know so long as there are land defenders on the ground, that our lands are still being defended. And it'll be the day when we don't have land defenders and people don't care, that's when we should worry. Today is the day that we should celebrate that you're still there and that you don't give up. Thank you for all that you do. And I'll make sure to post all the links to everything, and try to advocate for people to send supplies or donations or follow the protocols to come to camp. And hopefully one of these days you're going to come on this podcast and you're going to say they're out. They're gone. We stopped Coastal GasLink pipeline, because we've stopped pipelines before. We've stopped Alton Gas. We stopped the development at 1492. And so now it's Wet'suweten's turn.
Absolutely. I 100% wholeheartedly believe that we're going to win this fight, and we're not going to stop till we do.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all the listeners. Follow the links, support Wetsuweten, support Sleydo and everything they do. Till next time, keep living a warrior life. Walalia.